Guardians of the Galaxy. This one is a really fun time. It's a departure from the MCU, which is just great. Because of that, these characters are so much more memorable and better written. The controls here are solid, though there are some minor glitches throughout the game, but it's nothing major. The music was awesome, as you'd expect from Guardians of the Galaxy, and the gameplay progression was fun, but I really don't feel like the collectibles and different choices throughout the game give enough for a second playthrough. Still, I enjoyed it, so Guardians of the Galaxy, 85 out of 100. Mafia Definitive Edition is one I was really looking forward to, and it starts off a ton of fun, but it wears out its welcome about halfway through. It's horribly predictable, and it's clearly built for the shootouts, which are fun, because the hand-to-hand stuff just does not work well. Then about 40% of the game is just driving to your objectives, and after the car racing mission, about halfway through the game, everything else is just same stuff, different day. While I did enjoy my time with Mafia, overall it is a disappointing game. It gets a 55 out of 100. Far Cry 3 is such a fun game to play, and I honestly believe that Voss is among the best video game villains out there. Really, I do feel like Far Cry 3 was the pinnacle of the Far Cry series for me. The hunts and side missions here are good distractions without being overwhelming. The combat feels good, and the characters and progression here, it all feels good. The only real downside I had was that Volker, after dealing with Voss, is a real letdown. Oh, and I've got to mention Sam. He is my favorite side character in any Far Cry game. Far Cry 3 is definitely a game I can replay on occasion, getting it an 88 out of 100. Subnautica is an absolutely amazing game. This survival game has some of the most logical progression I've ever seen, and if you pay attention to the world around you, you can plan your bases so that you always have easy access to the resources you need. The game has some minor graphical issues, but nothing major, and the somewhat clunky controls were never a big issue either, as the most dangerous thing in the game for me was running out of oxygen. Subnautica absolutely blew me away at how good it was. This game gets a 93 out of 100. Saints Row 2022, the game that was supposed to rebirth the Saints Row franchise. It didn't. The story here was stupid, the characters were mediocre, and the side stuff was actually pretty fun. Yeah. The crime front missions in Saints Row I really enjoyed. The worst part was the ending of the story, which is going to live in my memory as the maddest I've ever been in a game. And, yeah, thinking back on it, actually, the thing that sticks out in my head is the Sandy Kraken missions, which were pretty clever and really fun. So, yeah, my feelings on Saints Row 2022 are mixed, so I've got to give it a 60 out of 100. Persona 4 Golden is quite literally one of the best games I have ever played. The only real drawback I had was that the camera controls caused issues on occasion in the dungeons. Other than that, the characters here were some of the best I've ever experienced in an RPG, and the combat and persona progression was incredibly fun and engaging. I really felt like I was a part of this world while playing through it, so Persona 4 is an absolute must-play with a 95 out of 100. High on Life is a fun little shooter that struggles with a bit of an identity crisis. Does it want to be a serious shooter game, or does it want to be a straight-up comedy shooter? At least it does both moderately well. Much of the comedy and the story feels pretty forced, but the hidden comedy you uncover through exploration is often solid gold. The shooter aspect here is fun too, if a little bit simplistic. Thankfully, the game is short, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. High on Life is a good diversion, if nothing else, getting it a 72 out of 100. Immortality is an interesting concept for a game. Or maybe it's more of a interactive movie experience. To be fair, I actually really enjoyed this game, but it will bore some folks to tears. The major problems here is that you're likely to finish the game before you've got enough of the hidden footage to really understand what's going on. And two, the progression through the scenes is random, meaning that a lot of times you're going to miss out on scenes because of a roll of the dice. Immortality is a really fun and cool game as an experiment with a new storytelling mechanic, but it certainly has its problems, getting it a 74 out of 100. Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion is a short little distraction of the game that can get a little dark at times. It's got a simplistic style for combat, an adorable silent protagonist, and you'll solve some minor puzzles and take on absurd bosses in fun little dungeons, all in an effort to help Turnip Boy avoid his taxes. This game is a single sitting game with absolutely zero replay value. I mean, really. Still, that single playthrough is a good time. Despite the simplicity, I had fun with Turnip Boy and helping him commit tax evasion, so this game gets a 71 out of 100. Sea of Stars is a modern JRPG if ever there was one. Action commands and combat, great storytelling, and memorable characters all make for a great time. Two issues I had with this game, and first is that the start of the game drags a bit. While it is interesting, it could have been shorter. My other issue was that the progression, while making sense in a few places, it never made sense for my main character, because she just used Moonerang throughout the game, and I do have to admit, though, I really enjoyed using that one. Getting good at it. Well, if you want a great modern JRPG, Sea of Stars is it. I've got to give this one a 92 out of 100. Starfield is such a difficult game to review. I mean, this is not the game I wanted it to be, but it kind of is at the same time. With Starfield, I was hoping for Skyrim in space. And story-wise, that's exactly what it is. Too much so. It's kind of disappointing to realize, but at the same time, it's actually kind of surprisingly fun. My biggest issue was that all the magic seemed to be gone from, exploration. In a space game, exploration, no magic. Perhaps it was overly ambitious of Bethesda to make a game like this, but, if you take Bethesda out of it, I really enjoyed Starfield, and it's a game I'm absolutely going to return to play again. Giving it an 86 out of 100. Vampire Survivors is a fun game to play alone or with friends. Even before the co-op came out, just passing the controller back and forth and yelling at the screen. The gameplay here is simple yet deep at the same time. While the basic idea is simple, the planning your pickups and evolutions for your weapons and loadouts can get really immersive. I can sit for hours playing this game or just do a quick 15-minute run, and it's always a blast. Sure, Vampire Survivors lacks a lot of the typical gameplay elements, but still it is incredibly fun. Vampire Survivors gets a 90 out of 100. Forager is a nice little indie game with crafting, survival, and exploration elements all rolled into one. Forager has some really fun puzzles, and the economy is really cool because it relies on you to advance it. This game absolutely shines in the early parts and in the build-up. The only drawback is that in the late game, you're stuck between grinding and being 10,000% overpowered for everything else. That said, this is a game I would recommend you try out. I give Forager a 76 out of 100. Nightmare at the Krusty Krab is a fan-made parody game where you play as SpongeBob fighting off hash-slinging slashers. If you're a SpongeBob fan, you really need to play this game just for the references alone. An entire run here only takes a matter of minutes, and while the controls are a little loose, they're not that hard to get used to. The most difficult thing here is learning what you need to do for all the different endings. But that being said, the absolute pinnacle of this game is the musical remixes. They are fantastic. Get this game for free over on itch.io. It is well worth it, and I give Nightmare at the Krusty Krab an 87 out of 100. Unpacking is a game that really surprised me. It came highly recommended, so I tried it out. And wow. For a game about unpacking boxes and arranging things after a move, Unpacking tells a complete and emotional story. The design of this game is so clever and well thought out. The only real issue I had here is that you're sometimes shoehorned into certain placements to tell the story the game wants to tell. And I guess, once you spend an hour or two with this game, you're done. There's no replay value here at all, but, overall, Unpacking impressed me. So, it's going to get an 89 out of 100. Death's Door is the first ever Souls-like game that I've actually completed. And it was honestly really fun. The challenge ramps up nicely throughout the game. The character design is absolutely amazing as each character is unique and memorable. My biggest issue was really with the controls here. They're not the most intuitive, and I was still having issues even late in the game. Death's Door is a great intro to Souls-likes if you've never tried this type of game before, and for veteran players, it's a nice diversion from some of the more difficult titles. I give Death's Door an 85 out of 100. Costume Quest is a game that was originally released on the Xbox Live Arcade. You play as a kid trying to rescue their sibling as you make friends, build new costumes to use in battle, and you can also use those costumes to traverse the environment better. Well, the best part about this game, it's got to be the Grubbins. The Grubbins are the primary goblin-like enemy. Their personalities are so infectious that they're just fun bad guys. Costume Quest is a fun and short RPG that I would highly recommend. This game, it gets an 82 out of 100. Costume Quest 2 is more the same from Costume Quest, just a bit worse. The game is still as solid as the first game, but it's either dumbed down like with the combat controls, or it's way more forced like with the story and the new costumes and characters. Anyways, the worst part here is the Grubbins. They ruined them. They went from infectious and fun to downright annoying. All said though, the gameplay was still solid and enjoyable for the most part. And while it did drag at times, I still wanted to see where the story was going. So, Costume Quest 2 gets a 68 out of 100. Fable 3 is a game that I personally really enjoy. I feel like this is a game that shines really because of its weird writing and odd characters. The major problems that plague this game are the brevity. The whole game does, in fact, feel tremendously rushed, but then again, I never got bored with it, so... The other issue is the clunky controls, which have always really been an issue with Fable games, so you got that too. Everything around those things, though, are really enjoyable and fun. Fable 3 may not be the best of the series, but it is definitely one I would recommend folks to try out if they have never tried a Fable game before. Fable 3 gets an 84 out of 100. Grounded is a survival game in the vein of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This game has got to have one of the best, most logical progression systems I've ever seen in a survival game. It really rewards exploration and perseverance in the face of mounting challenges. Where Grounded lacks is in the story. Because I really couldn't care less here, the story was meh at best. On the other hand, base building and constructing an intricate system of zip lines to get all around the map in a matter of no time? Yes, please, count me in. And that is why Grounded is getting an 85 out of 100. Lies of P, the Souls-like where you play as Pinocchio. Well, let's get the negative out of the way first. The big bad at the end of the game is rather boring, and his boss fight is just disappointing. And outside of the records that you can find and play in Hotel Krot, the music and sound design is boring and lackluster. Now, on to the controls and gameplay. Man, they planned this game out right. The controls are intuitive. The only times I had issues were fumbling over my own fingers in tense moments. And the progression here is oh so satisfying. Lies of P is a game I would highly recommend you playing through, and then playing through a second time on New Game Plus just to get some of the extra story bits. Lies of P gets an 85 out of 100. Persona 3 Reload is an absolutely fun game to play. The combat feels good, the progression and the personas are great, and the vast majority of the social links are interesting and fun. Yes, I said majority because some of them I couldn't give a crap about. The characters sucked, their stories sucked. But I forced my way through them. And even handling some of the main characters, though. There was a pivotal emotional moment that just fell flat because of the way it was done. I did find the controls in this game to be a bit slippy at first in the dungeons, but you got upgrades later on to deal with that, so it ended up feeling pretty nice overall. And sadly, the final boss in Persona 3 Reload is no threat, and never ever feels like one. Still, I absolutely love Persona 3 Reload, and I give it an 87 out of 100. Superliminal. Perception is reality. Now that is a concept you can really have fun with, and Superliminal really goes off the rails in a good way. The puzzles here are really good, but sometimes they can be oversimplistic. Then there's the story here, which I personally felt was very impactful and well told. I mean, I could see this game really helping some folks in certain times in their lives. My biggest gripe with Superliminal is that the controls are sometimes the main hurdle to solving a particular puzzle. But other than that, I had a great time with this game, and it was short enough that the premise did not get boring, earning Superliminal an 84 out of 100. Cocoon is an absolutely standout puzzle game. The controls here are easy to pick up and play, and the dimension hopping that you'll have to do to solve puzzles is easy to understand, making this game very accessible to folks. The puzzles here are put together extremely well and get progressively more difficult in a good way as the game goes on. The music here is also something that's really great, as the aligning of the score with what's happening on screen really helps insert an emotional impact to the story that will probably go over some players' heads. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but the story and characters are not really spelled out for you, and it's a bit more cerebral than some folks will like in their games. Thankfully, I ain't one of those people. I loved Cocoon, and that gets it a 90 out of 100. Vinba. Oh, what to say about Vinba. Vinba is a puzzle game where the puzzles are recipes in your mother's cookbook. And the puzzles are very fun. And having a basic knowledge of cooking can really help you out on these puzzles, even if you're not familiar with Indian cooking specifically. So yes, puzzles are very fun. But Vinba truly shines in the story segments that link together the gameplay. Vinba tells an emotional story that pulled on my heartstrings. On top of all this, the game clocks in at right around an hour. It's just such a nice contained experience. Vinba is really one of those must-play games, and it gets a 94 out of 100. In Bramble, you play as Ole on his quest to find his sister as you fight your way through various Nordic monsters. This game is just beautiful to look at, and the music is sublime. The story here is a good one as well. I mean, it drew me in. The only real drawback was the puzzles, if you can call them that. I mean, the answer to every puzzle is just keep moving forward. Some of the monster or boss battles were uninspired as well. Only 2 of them really felt like I was fighting for my life. But here's where the game gets really good. Go for the achievements. If you go for the achievements, that escalates Bramble to a whole other league. Bramble gets a 79 out of 100. Final Fantasy XVI is a return to the epic storytelling I expect from a Final Fantasy game. The story here is good and the world just feels alive. And I think that's because the setting and story here are more mature, but hey, I'm here for it. Plus, the characters are my favorite aspect of this game. It actually feels like they're part of the story rather than just being along for the ride. The music, something that didn't really click with me, and alongside some of the visuals during the more intense combat segments being a bit choppy, the whole thing was a bit jarring. Then there's the controls, which I feel like were probably designed for someone with 11 fingers in each hand. But to be fair, I got a lot better at those controls as time went on, and it wasn't an issue by the end of the game. I'm giving Final Fantasy XVI an 87 out of 100. Dragon Quest Heroes, The World Trees Woe and the Blight Below. Well, that's the summary of the story. It is what it is. The game is Dynasty Warriors in the Dragon Quest universe, you know. I have 3 real gripes with this game. First off, the characters can get really annoying. They only have like 3 voice lines each for battle. And the male main character is, I want to punch him in the face. The second, story's terrible. We already covered that. And finally, the progression, especially late game progression, just does not feel good. Now that that is out of the way, the music in this game is fantastic. I did not expect that. I absolutely love the combat. The battles are a blast. And the coin system that lets you summon allied monsters in battle, fantastic. I would create whole platoons of monsters to guard areas of the map for me. So yeah, it's a Koei game. I really didn't expect much, but I still had a good time. Dragon Quest Heroes, The World Trees Woe, and the Blight Below, well, it gets a 74 out of 100.